super powerful, I think, in seating those people together sometimes. And so to the extent, I wondered a little bit if, if you were looking at one of the plenary sessions, and then you took, instead of, the hour or whatever that you were devoting to it, if you took a half hour for the presentation, and then had, a 15-minute, you sat everybody based not on their college identity, but on their role at the college, right? So you were forcing people to kind of position themselves differently than they would be, and they don't have the comfort of being there with their team. And then you give them 15 or 20 minutes to talk at the table about what they just heard, and then you do a quick debrief, from the room around some of that. It both creates that kind of networking sense of support, the real opportunity to hear from other people how they approach that, or so anyway, I thought something like that, where it's not a breakout, but so it happens in the big room, but it also it'd get loud, and that would be fun, right? Like, I think people would feel the energy of it, and it would make it a little, it might be harder to get the full level of the content, but I think you'd be getting much more engagement and take home, from that. And so, that might be something, I think it's something they've done before that, could be leveraged a little bit. And I would just say, stylistically, my feel was that there was maybe those opening plenaries were a little long and strung together without a break, and, trying to think stylistically how you can do that a little bit differently so that it feels like not every session runs into the other, in your memory bank, they're not all the same.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. Thank you. Was there any aha or key learning that you took away from the Institute, either kind of that you took away personally or that you believe campuses might have taken away?
There was something that came up in the president's breakout that I remember thinking, oh, wow. Well, I guess, it was just the way that the 50% plus one law lands, and the thought that the dam's going to break on that. I felt like we've talked internally in the foundation about whether or not that's an area for us to spend time thinking about, or whether or not there's a possibility to do anything about that. And it was really interesting both to hear how significant an obstacle that was to the presidents who were trying to figure out how to do better, and also to hear some of them say that it is just inevitable that that's eventually going to have to change, or that it's eventually going to change, which I hadn't heard before. And to some degree, maybe it was a little overly optimistic. But nonetheless, I guess that was, for me, an important sort of moment to think about, well, it's clearly an obstacle, and maybe there is a possibility to think about, what needs to get done to make that policy change happen. So, so I guess that's what I'd say, was kind of a significant takeaway. I had some, for me, the real, I guess I hadn't said this yet, but, I just spent, for me, the best part of it was just hanging out in the bar, meeting people who I hadn't met before. Oh, and this was, this is part of it, right? Like I meant to say this actually as I was getting ready for this. In that social time, people were, they were connecting, personally and whatnot, but it was really interesting to just sit in on conversations that people were having. And they were not necessarily talking about obstacles to guided pathways, but they were talking about obstacles, just challenges in the work, challenges in doing their jobs, which, are part of the guided pathway story, right? So among the conversations that I was a part of, there was a whole series of things about how challenging it is to work with particular boards, what might be done to deal with the sort of things that are inherent in our 72 district board structure, and how people locally are elected to head them and that sort of thing. So it was there's value just in that, right? And then, and there was, a nice mix in a couple of the conversations I was in between folks that had been around the block for a while, had a lot of experience, and folks who, were really kind of brand new in their leadership roles. And watching that sort of conversation happen, you could tell that, people were listening and, getting real benefit from, the experience that other folks had. So, that's not to be underestimated, the power of that. It's hard to document kind of what that content's like, right? Like, I think it's particularly challenging because it's not part of the program and people aren't necessarily thinking, that, hanging out in the bar talking with some colleagues at a institution totally in a different part of the state than their own is really helping deliver the work. But in my mind, it really is. And so that was, I thought, an important part of it. And sort of thinking, I don't know what you do with that, except that, if you acknowledge that, how might you be able to maximize that and encourage, set the circumstances where more of that can happen. And I thought the reception was one of the places where that happened some. But, there's always not enough time in the day, so, yeah.
Yeah, but making space for that informal kind of networking and social time for that to organically happen. Yeah.
I'm super cognizant that if you don't structure the time, people will go off or whatever, and only the people that would have found the opportunity to do it anyway end up going. So, there's a little bit of that. And, I think most people went out with their teams on that first night, and that makes sense to me. But, it's, I think it, obviously there's always different ways to use the time, but, just, the recognition that it's more than that, the value to folks, I thought, goes well beyond what just the straight level presentational, content components of the Institute are. So.
Yeah. This is really helpful. Before we wrap up, is there anything else that you want to share that we didn't talk about?
Well, I appreciate the questions and the prompts. It did get me to that thing, which I would have definitely bummed if I had not said that. But yeah. Oh, there was one thing. This is just I'm looking at a note from Kay's session, where she was referencing what happens when the guided pathways money goes away. Mm-hmm. And it was funny because it seemed to me like that was the result of a presidential survey. And I think in some ways that would be anxiety producing, right? Like when she offered it, I was like, oh, wow, that's on people's minds. Because I feel like in California there's lots of money in the system right now. And when that question was posed in the group, people didn't sort of jump on it. And so I'm left wondering, is that a concern? And if so, what's the nature of it, right? Like, what would it mean? And, how would it, I don't know. I guess I'm interested in that. I thought that was opened in that session in a way that I would have expected more uptake if it was top of mind. And